Have you ever imagined being left at the altar on the most important night of your life? Everything seemed perfect until he simply walked away. How would you react? The pain of betrayal, the shock, the shame, all in a single moment. But what if I told you that a simple note could change everything? Would you believe that amidst the chaos there's still room for hope? This story will show you how an unexpected gesture can turn the tables, challenging everything you believe about love and life. Are you ready to discover the truth no one told you?
The sun shone intensely in the blue sky, reflecting the joy and anticipation in the air. The hall was decorated with white and lilac flowers, creating a magical atmosphere for the much-awaited wedding of Violet and Anthony. White sofas and chairs were precisely arranged, while the elegantly dressed guests chatted animatedly, some with champagne glasses in hand. Violet, in her delicate lace wedding dress, was radiant. She looked at the mirror, admiring the reflection of the young woman who was about to take such an important step in her life. "You look stunning, Violet," exclaimed Lucia, her best friend, who was also the maid of honor. With a wide smile, Lucia adjusted the bride's veil, her eyes shining with emotion. "Anthony will be speechless when he sees you." Violet smiled, but a wave of nervousness washed over her. "What if he doesn't show up, Lucia? What if?" The sentence hung in the air, but her friend quickly dismissed the insecurity. "He will show up, I'm sure. He loves you, Violet. That's all that matters." After a few hours of preparations, the moment finally arrived. The first chords of music echoed through the hall, and Violet began to walk towards the altar, her heart racing. All eyes were on her. At the altar, Anthony awaited her, dressed in a dark suit that accentuated his athletic figure. His eyes sparkled with love, and when their gazes met, Violet felt everything was perfectly aligned. The ceremony proceeded with emotional vows and promises of eternal love. Violet could barely contain her tears of happiness. But when the officiant paused to ask if anyone had anything to declare, a slight murmur began to rise among the guests. Violet felt a shiver down her spine, but ignored the feeling, focusing on Anthony. However, as the moment dragged on, Anthony's expression began to change. He seemed nervous, uneasy, as if struggling internally with something. Violet frowned, worried. "Anthony," she called, but his voice didn't come out. The silence was cutting. Suddenly, he turned and ran away from the altar, leaving Violet and all the guests in shock. "What's happening?" murmured a guest, while another whispered, "This can't be real." Confusion took over the room. "Anthony!" Violet screamed, but her voice sounded distant, lost in the growing murmur. She tried to follow Anthony, but her feet felt heavy, as if an invisible force was holding her back. Lucia grabbed her hand as tears began to roll down Violet's face. "I'm going after him," she decided, but before she could take another step, one of Anthony's uncles appeared, looking concerned. "Calm down, Violet. We'll find him. Please stay here," he said, trying to soothe her. But all Violet could feel was a deep emptiness, a confusion that wrapped around her like a heavy cloak. The murmur of the guests intensified, blending with the music that now sounded distant, as if the world around her had slowed down. As she searched for answers, Violet's eyes fell on Anthony's jacket, thrown on a nearby chair. On impulse, she approached and reached into the pocket. That's when her fingers touched a piece of paper. A note. "No, it can't be," she thought, her heart racing as she pulled out the note and opened it. The words danced before her eyes, and reality began to crumble around her. What she discovered at that moment would change everything. Violet breathed deeply, trying to calm the whirlwind of emotions overwhelming her. After the chaos of the ceremony, the last thing she expected was to find a note in Anthony's jacket. With trembling hands, she took out the crumpled piece of paper, and as she unfolded it, her eyes fixed on the hastily but clearly written words. "If you're reading this, it's because I'm not here. There are truths you can't know, truths that could hurt you and everyone around us. I love you, but I can't stay. Find the truth before it's too late. D." Violet's heart raced. The message was cryptic and unsettling. What did Anthony mean by truths that could hurt? She felt as if she were in a nightmare. The image of the altar, the anticipation of the guests, and now this note that seemed like an invitation to a dark world left her lost. "Why did you leave, Anthony?" she whispered, looking at the note as if it could provide answers. Tears began to slip down her face, the fragility of the moment enveloping her like a dense mist. Determined, Violet tucked the note into the pocket of her dress and set out in search of answers. As she walked, the voices that were once murmurs of joy now sounded like echoes of a funeral. She moved away from the party, seeking a quieter place to think. She found a corner of the garden where sunlight filtered softly through the trees. She sat on a wooden bench and tried to organize her thoughts. What could be in Anthony's family that justified his disappearance? At that moment, someone approached. It was Blake, her ex-boyfriend, who looked at her with concern. His face was familiar, but the expression was new, filled with empathy and sadness. "Violet, what happened? I only found out after everyone started talking," he said, sitting beside her. "Anthony, he disappeared, at the altar, and I found this." Violet handed the note to Blake, who read it in silence, his expression changing with each word he absorbed. "This is very serious. You need to find out what's going on. Anthony isn't just a runaway groom. There's something more behind this," Blake said, closing the note and looking into Violet's eyes. "You know you can count on me, right?" Violet nodded, still in shock. "I don't know where to start. What could be so terrible in his family? What did he hide from me?" "Sometimes families have secrets that can destroy lives. I've been through something like that, and I know how it is," Blake said, his voice soft. "But you're not alone. I'm here." The warmth of Blake's presence brought unexpected comfort. They had shared so many memories, and despite the time and wounds that separated them, the connection seemed to reignite. "I don't know if I'm ready for this, Blake. To face everything Anthony might have hidden," Violet confessed, a weakness in her voice. "You're stronger than you think, Violet, and facing the truth, no matter how painful, might be the only way to move forward. Remember who you are." "You've always been brave," Blake replied, encouraging her to look within herself. Violet took a deep breath, feeling a mix of gratitude and confusion. "And what if the truth hurts me even more? What if I discover that everything I believed about love and about Anthony was a lie? Sometimes, love is more complicated than we'd like it to be, but you deserve to know the truth, and I'll be by your side, no matter what happens," Blake said, holding her hand. The simple but meaningful gesture sent warmth through Violet's body. She smiled, even amidst the pain. "Thank you, Blake. I don't know what I'd do without you here." The words escaped her lips like a whisper of hope amidst despair. As the sun began to set, painting the sky orange and pink, Violet knew she needed to face the secrets surrounding Anthony. It was time to explore the unknown, and with Blake by her side, maybe she could find her way back to herself. Violet looked out the window of the cafe where she was meeting Blake, watching the rain fall in heavy drops. The cozy and welcoming environment contrasted with the storm brewing inside her. The memories of her past with Anthony mingled with recollections of happier moments with Blake. It was as if time had stopped, and the conversations they never had could finally be spoken. Blake, sitting across from her, raised the steaming cup of coffee in a silent toast. Violet smiled, a timid gesture, but at the same time full of meaning. He always knew how to bring her to the surface, even in the darkest moments. "Remember that time we went to Clara's birthday party? You danced until dawn," he said, trying to break the ice. "How could I forget? You even dared to pull me onto the dance floor, even though you knew I didn't like dancing," she laughed, the memories bringing a sparkle to her eyes. "You were so persistent, and you were so stubborn. But I was right, wasn't I?" He smiled, his gaze getting lost in hers. That night was magical. Violet felt her heart race. It was as if the connection between them was reigniting, but a shadow of guilt lingered over her thoughts. "Blake, I don't know if it's right for me to be here talking to you like this. I'm still processing everything that happened with Anthony." "I understand. It's hard, I know. But you also deserve to be happy, Violet," he said, his tone serious. "Life doesn't stop because of a love that didn't work out. Sometimes we need to move on, even if it means leaving some things behind. I've been through that too." "You were betrayed, weren't you?" The question slipped from her lips before she could think. The pain in his eyes was visible. "I'm sorry. It was some time ago. I let myself be led by trust, just like you did with Anthony. But I learned that true love isn't just about promises and words. Sometimes it's about knowing when to walk away." The sincerity in his voice made Violet feel more at ease to open her heart. "I don't know if I can just leave all this behind. Anthony was part of my life for so long. I still love him. The confession came out as a whisper, almost imperceptible. Loving someone doesn't mean you should take them back, especially if they're not who you thought they were, Blake said with a firm but gentle look. You saw what he did, Violet, what he failed to do. Violet sighed, confusion clouding her thoughts. I know, but it's so hard. I never thought he would be capable of leaving me like that, on our wedding day. Sometimes, people have their own battles. He may be dealing with things you don't know about, but that doesn't justify what he did, and it doesn't mean you should stay trapped in that memory. Blake leaned forward, his gaze intense. I want you to know that I'll be here, no matter what you decide, but you need to be honest with yourself. His words echoed in her heart, and Violet felt a wave of conflicting emotions. And what about us? What does this mean? Blake hesitated, as if carefully choosing his words. It means that I'm here for you, Violet. If you decide to give me a chance, I'll be ready. But I don't want you to feel like you have to choose between me and Anthony. You need to understand what you really want. The rain outside began to subside, and sunlight slowly penetrated through the gray clouds. Violet looked out the window, watching the drops running down the glass, reflecting the changes in her life. I need time. I need to understand all this. And I'll be here waiting, Blake replied, his voice soft but firm. The decision is yours, and I respect that. Violet smiled, feeling a bit lighter. It was a small step, but an important one in her journey of self-discovery. And as the world continued to spin outside, she realized that life still had much to offer. Violet was determined to understand what had happened and to seek answers about Anthony's disappearance. The revelations she found in the note haunted her, and the idea that he might have been complicit in a dark past left her restless. As soon as the sun rose, she decided she couldn't stay still any longer. It was time to thoroughly investigate Anthony's family. With a racing heart, Violet grabbed her phone and decided to visit Anthony's mother, Mrs. Lydia. She had always considered her a strong and imposing woman. However, the recent discoveries made her apprehensive. Upon arriving at Mrs. Lydia's house, an old mansion with a lush garden, Violet hesitated before ringing the doorbell. The sound echoed, and moments later, the door opened. Hi, Violet. What are you doing here? Mrs. Lydia asked, with a smile that couldn't hide the worry in her eyes. Hi, Mrs. Lydia. I need to talk to you. It's about Anthony, Violet replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Of course. Come in. Let's go to the living room, Mrs. Lydia said, gesturing for the young woman to enter. Violet sat on a luxurious sofa, but the comfort of the environment couldn't calm her uneasiness. Mrs. Lydia, noticing the tension in the air, offered her some tea. You look pale, dear. Is everything okay? I don't think so, Mrs. Lydia. I found a note from Anthony, and in it there were some things that worried me, Violet began, hesitating to express her doubts. A note? What did it say? Anthony's mother asked, her expression quickly shifting from concern to a look that seemed like she was trying to hide something. Violet took a deep breath, deciding she needed to be direct. He mentioned a dark past in your family, something about betrayals and disillusionments. What does that mean? Mrs. Lydia was silent for a moment, as if pondering her words. Finally, she spoke, her tone more serious. Violet, there are things in our family that we prefer to forget. Anthony's name might be tainted by unresolved scandals, but he's not involved in that. He's a good boy. But what happened? What are you hiding? Violet insisted, her voice rising with frustration. I can't just ignore this. Mrs. Lydia looked away, and the young woman noticed a weakness in her posture. There was a time when our family got involved in businesses that could be considered unscrupulous. I didn't want Anthony to become a victim of that. Businesses? What kind of businesses? Violet asked, curiosity and uneasiness taking hold of her. Deals that involve people who aren't exactly trustworthy. I had hoped that Anthony would distance himself from that, but he's always been so stubborn, Mrs. Lydia said, her gaze lost in the past. And if he's caught up in this, Mrs. Lydia, what if he's running from something much worse than just a wedding? Violet questioned, her emotions running high with each word. I can't guarantee he's involved, but the risks are high. Violet, I beg you not to get more involved than you already are. This could be dangerous for you, Mrs. Lydia warned, the worry now evident in her voice. The revelation left Violet in a whirlwind of feelings. The love she felt for Anthony was mixing with disillusionment and betrayal, and with each new piece of information, her heart seemed to tighten more. "I just want to understand, Mrs. Lydia. What I feel for Anthony has always been true, but now it all seems like a big lie." Mrs. Lydia approached, placing her hand on Violet's arm. "I know it's hard, but you need to be strong. Don't let Anthony's past define what you have. He needs you, and you need him." But Mrs. Lydia's words weren't enough to calm the storm inside Violet. With each passing moment, it became more evident that she was trapped in an emotional dilemma. The love and trust she once felt for Anthony were now transforming into doubts and uncertainties. And what anguished her the most was the image of Blake, who seemed to be the only anchor in the midst of all that confusion. "I don't know if I can keep going like this, Mrs. Lydia. I need time to think," Violet said, standing up and heading for the door. "Please, Violet, don't turn away from Anthony without talking to him. Things may not be what they seem," Mrs. Lydia pleaded, but Violet had already closed the door behind her, feeling the weight of a decision she still couldn't make. The sunlight blinded her, but it was the darkness of the future that scared her the most. Violet and Blake met at a cozy cafe in the city center. The walls were adorned with old photos and paintings by local artists, while the aroma of fresh coffee filled the air. Even in such a welcoming environment, a weight hung over Violet's shoulders. The memories of what should have been her big day still haunted her, but Blake's presence brought a faint light to her wounded heart. "Are you okay?" Blake asked, breaking the silence. His eyes, a mix of concern and empathy, searched Violet's. She took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "It's hard, you know. I never thought my life would take this turn. Anthony, I don't know what to think about him now," Violet replied, her voice choked. "His betrayal left me so confused. How can I trust anyone again?" Blake leaned forward, his fingers interlacing. "Trust is something precious, and when it's broken, it takes time to rebuild, but you don't have to do it alone." He smiled gently, and Violet felt her heart race. It was a familiar feeling, but also strange, considering the emotional turmoil that still surrounded her. "I appreciate that, Blake, but I can't just forget everything that happened. What Anthony did, I can't brush it aside," she murmured, looking at the coffee cup, watching the steam rise in spirals. "You don't have to forget, but maybe you can learn to live with it," he suggested, his voice soft. "What do you really want, Violet? What would make your heart feel light again?" Violet hesitated. She thought about everything she had gone through, every tear shed, every shattered dream. I want answers. I need to understand why he did this. Before I move on, I need the truth," she confessed, her gaze now firm. Blake nodded, understanding the seriousness of her words. "Then you should go after it. But remember, confronting Anthony might bring up feelings you haven't resolved yet. Are you ready for that?" The question echoed in Violet's mind. Was she really ready to face her past? And what if she discovered that Anthony wasn't the man she thought he was? The fear of more pain paralyzed her, but the determination to know the truth was stronger. "I don't know, but I have to try. I can't live with this uncertainty," she replied, firm in her decision. "If I don't do this, I'll always be stuck with what happened, and I don't want that for myself." "Then I'll be by your side, no matter what happens," Blake assured, holding her hand across the table. The connection between them was palpable, an invisible thread that bound them in a way that Violet wasn't sure was love or friendship, but it was comforting. As they talked, an idea began to form in Violet's mind. What if I found him? Do you think that would be a good idea? She looked at Blake, seeking his opinion. "If that's the only way for you to find peace, then yes, but be prepared for everything. The truth might be more painful than you imagine," he warned, making it clear that the journey to discover what really happened with Anthony could be full of surprises and unexpected revelations. "I know," Violet replied, feeling the weight of the decision. "But I need to do this, for me and for what's left of what we had." "Then how about we start now?" Blake suggested, a determined gleam in his eyes. "Let's find out where he is and what really happened." With a deep sigh, Violet nodded. Determination grew within her, replacing the confusion and pain. Whatever awaited her, she was ready to face it, no longer alone, but with Blake by her side. And as they stood up to leave, a new hope began to blossom in her heart. Violet walked with firm steps along the trail that led to the isolated place where Anthony had been last seen. Her heart beat erratically, a mixture of nervousness and determination. The sunlight began to set, painting the sky a deep orange, as if the universe were aware of the turmoil unfolding within her. With each step, she remembered Blake's words, encouraging her to seek the truth, no matter the cost. Upon reaching a clearing surrounded by tall, dense trees, Violet saw Anthony. He was leaning against a tree, his expression tense and his eyes lost in thought. As she approached, he seemed to notice her presence and turned, his face lighting up briefly before closing off again. "Violet," he whispered, his voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" "I came to find you," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "We need to talk." Anthony hesitated but finally nodded, gesturing for her to come closer. The clearing, once silent, seemed to pulse around them, as if nature were attentive to this decisive conversation. "I know you ran, Anthony, but I need to understand why. What's going on?" Violet asked, her gaze fixed on his, seeking sincerity that seemed distant. "I didn't know how to deal with all this. My family, Violet, they're involved in things you can't imagine. I had to leave. I had to protect myself," he replied, his voice breaking in places. Violet frowned, feeling a mix of confusion and anger. "Protect yourself from what? You left me at the altar, and now you're telling me it's because of your family? What are you hiding?" Anthony took a deep breath, the tension in his shoulders evident. "My mother, she's behind all this. She manipulated situations, betrayals. What happened between us wasn't just a mistake, Violet. It was a consequence of what my family does in secret." Violet felt her stomach churn. "What do you mean by that? What does your mother have to do with our relationship?" She was beginning to realize that the situation was much more complex than she had imagined. "She always wanted to control my life, always had her own plans. When she found out I was getting married, she was furious. She couldn't accept that I chose you. Believe me, I didn't want this to happen. I didn't want to hurt you," Anthony explained, his voice cracking. Violet's anger turned into something deeper, a feeling of betrayal. "So you were willing to leave me because of your mother? You didn't fight for us." Her eyes filled with tears as the words came out like a cry of pain. I fought as hard as I could," Anthony retorted, his frustration apparent. "But I was scared of what she could do. If you knew the truth, you wouldn't forgive me." "Try to explain it to me then," she demanded, feeling the weight of the truth that was yet to come. Anthony hesitated, looking at the ground before finally confessing. "My mother is involved in a scheme of betrayals and manipulations in the family business. She wouldn't hesitate to use anyone to achieve her goals, and I didn't want you to become a victim of that. I didn't know how to deal with all this." The revelation was like a bomb exploding in her mind. The clues she had found, the conversations with Anthony's mother, it all made sense now. Violet realized that the truth was unraveling before her, and Anthony's pain didn't stop her from seeing that the love she felt for him was dissipating, slowly being replaced by a new clarity. "You can't go on like this. You need to confront your mother, Anthony. If you don't, you'll never be free," Violet said, her voice now firm. Anthony looked at her, his expression a mixture of despair and hope. "And what about us? What do I do with this? I still love you, Violet." I don't know if I can keep loving someone who left me so easily," she admitted, the pain of her words echoing in the silent clearing. "But I need to be honest with myself. I need to free myself." Reflecting on the story you just heard, ask yourself, how are you dealing with your own adversities? Is there something in your life that needs a new perspective? This story shows that even in the most painful situations, there is a chance for transformation and growth. It's possible that a simple act of courage and a new approach can completely change your current situation. If you're ready to face your difficulties and find new paths to happiness, don't forget to click on the video that's appearing on your screen now. In my opinion, this is one of the best stories I've ever told, the most emotional. And if you liked what you just heard, you'll definitely love this other story too. So subscribe to the channel, click on the video on your screen now, and I'll see you in a few seconds.